Hi friends, it's Chari. Today I have a really fun summer card using the new coloring stencils from lawnfawn. So I am using the treat cart stamp set for my card today and the brand new coloring stencils that help you color in the images. And I'm going to tell you a few fun things that I really love about these coloring stencils. First, their size so they fit in your stamp pocket perfectly, which is amazing. Second, if we were coloring with our markers, we would have to make sure we're using some alcohol-friendly ink. But since we're using our inks to color it in, we can stamp in any ink in our collection. So for today, I'm using some neutrals. I've got some Hippo ink here for the treat cart. But the other really fun thing is if you're stamping grass or clouds, you could use green or blue. You could use any color you wanted. I'm using some walnut ink for my little bear and my little fox. But you could stamp these in any color you wanted. Maybe you want a pink bear. You could stamp it in a pink color and then color it in with pink ink. For my little bunny, I'm using some dough ink. And I like the look that this gives with that lighter brown outline. So you'll see as I colored in the different looks we're going to get. And then for my little accessories, I have the little banner. I'm just using Soot ink. So this is a very dark grayish brown, but you could use black if you wanted. I just wanted to show you that you could use any ink in your collection to stamp out your images when you're going to use the stencils to color them. So for my little ice creams here, I'm also using that Soot ink. So I have the little ice cream sundae with the cherry on top, the ice cream cone, and the little popsicle. So now that all of my images are stamped out in the inks that I want, I'm going to pull out my coloring stencils and start to color. And it's really great to have those little ink cubes that lawnfawn has because you can pull out all your colors at once and have them on your desk to choose from, just like you would your markers. So for my little bunny here, I pulled out apricot ink to use to color it in, and I will be using a small blending brush. I also have the little finger dauber brushes, which are perfect for this application as well. And I'm just going to pick up a little bit of ink on that brush and then lightly color him in. And these are really easy to line up because they have etching lines so you can see right where to line everything up. So now that his body is colored in, I can move to the next stencil for the bunny, which has the nose, the inside of the ear, and the tail. Now I'm not really going to color in the tail, I'm going to leave it white, but I pulled out the peachy keen ink and just dabbed a little pink inside his ear and for his nose. Now I'm going to speed things up just a little bit, but not too much. You saw how quickly it was to color that cute little bunny in. For my fox, I'm using some pumpkin spice. And you can see that I can get some shadowing just by adding more ink towards the bottom of his body and less ink at the top. For the face, I'm going to pull out some sugar cookie, which is this really light kind of creamy color. I don't have a brush dedicated to this color in my flat brushes, but I have these little tiny detail brushes and I just use that to add a little bit of color to his face. And now I'm going to move on to my little bear and use some dough ink. Now the bear is really fun because there is a stencil for his body and a stencil for his head, allowing you to get some nice shading. Now for this one I am using a larger brush just because I forgot to pull out my little finger dauber brushes, but if you're very careful you can see these brushes work pretty well too. So I added ink so that there was more shading at the top of his body, so under his chin. And then for his head, I am doing the opposite. So more shading towards the bottom of his face, and you can see we get this really cool shading on our little bear. Now I'm moving on to that little banner there, and this has openings so you can color it. Every other one is a different color. For me, I'm going to do it in rainbow rather than doing all of the ones in this cutout the same color. So I'm just carefully adding my ink, making sure not to get into the other opening on this little part of the stencil. If you felt like your brush was too big and you were going to spread your ink, you could always just cover this up with a piece of paper or a Post-it note. So I added guava ink, sunflower ink, and forget-me-not ink. And now I'm just going to pull that, and I like to wipe it off just so I don't get any finger smudges from the ink left on my stencil. Shifting it over to the other stencil for the little bunting banner, and then I can add in my orange and my green. Now you are going to see me do this same rainbow method for the canopy of the treat cart when I get around to coloring that too. Now I'm going to move on to the little ice creams. Yes, there are openings for every little image in this set on this coloring stencil. So I have found my little ice cream scoop that's in the cone, and I can add some pink to this so we have some strawberry ice cream in our ice cream cone. Then I'm going to shift it over and find the popsicle and add some purple ink to that, some grape jelly ink for a grape popsicle. And then there is also the openings for the stick, so I'll add a little bit of brown just using whatever ink is left over on my brush, and a little bit of brown on that ice cream cone. Now the really fun part is this ice cream sundae. It's so tiny and there's such little openings, but they are all there and it colors it perfectly. So I have some teal for the cup. I'm going to pull out that little detail brush and my sugar cookie ink again to make some vanilla ice cream. And then instead of doing hot fudge, which you could also do, I thought it would be fun to make this a little more colorful, and I added some strawberry topping onto my vanilla ice cream. And then my favorite part, this tiny little cherry. So I'm gonna grab my lobster ink and my brush and just dab right in that hole, and perfectly colored cherry. I just think that is so cool. Look at those yummy ice creams. So now we need to color our treat cart. So I am finding that stencil for the treat cart. You can see this one does every other stripe on the canopy. I am going to color it in rainbows and change my colors up, but you could color all these openings in one color and then when you flip to the other, get another. So you just have two colors for your canopy. I'm just skipping over my colors in the order in which I want them. So this is merman, I have guava, and I have sunflower for my pink and my yellow. And I'm going to go ahead and use that merman ink to color in the countertop and the stripe along the bottom of the cart. And I love that this has the wheel cut out so that we don't get any ink in that wheel. Finally, I need to finish off with purple on that last stripe. And then I can pull this away, and I like to wipe this off so I don't get ink on my fingers, so I don't get any smudges in my next little part of my image. And then I'll move this to where we have the other treat cart opening. So this will allow me to do the other stripes, and I'll be using some fake tan, freshly cut grass, and forget-me-not ink for those stripes. I did go ahead and get my orange ink off of there because I had a little too much and I didn't want it to accidentally mix with my green and make it a little bit messy. So there is the freshly cut grass green and the forget-me-not blue. And look how pretty that is. I'm going to pop this back into place, and I decided to pull out that purple, which is grape jelly, and add purple to that larger stripe on the treat cart. And I am coloring it in such a way to where I have a little bit more shading towards the top, like there's a shadow underneath the countertop of the cart. Now we have a couple more details to color on this cart. We have the little wheels, which is on a different sheet over here, so let me grab it. And the fun thing about this is that because this is a circle and we want to keep the inside, is we're doing half the wheel and then we'll shift it and do the other half. This one also has the handle on it, and then now we can shift it up and do the bottom half of the wheel. And I did get a little overzealous with the bottom half, so I need to add a little bit more ink to the top. But it's super easy to line this up and just add more ink if you need to. And now I'm finding the stencil that has the center part of the wheels and adding a bit darker gray to those. And of course, then there are the vertical pieces. So I can add a little bit of manatee ink. This is a bit lighter gray to those areas. Now I did miss the handle that comes up to the grip, but you'll see that I will catch that really quickly once these are cut out with the coordinating dies. So you can easily line up the coordinating dies, hold them in place with some tape, and now we have these perfectly cut, perfectly colored images using our inks. And I just think that this is so fun. So this is where I realized I missed that little handle, but I just wanted to show you, you can easily line these up to something that's already die cut. You could use a grip mat to hold your die cuts in place and color them after you cut them if you would like to do that as well. So now I'm going to push these aside and we're going to work on our card. I'm using papers from the Pint-Sized Patterns Summertime collection. I'll be using a yellow, that pink with the little stripe, and the blue with the little bubbles. So I'll start out with the yellow first and cut this with the largest stitch rectangle stackable. So this will cover my entire card front. And I like to make sure this is lined up with the grid, hold it in place with some tape, and run it through the die cut machine. What I wanted to do is create a panel through the middle in the blue paper, but I thought it would be fun to have a little stitching detail. So what I'm doing is pulling out one of my stitch rectangles. This one is 3.5 inches wide, I believe, and it is just slightly taller than what the background piece is. So when I trim it off, I'm going to have the stitching detail on the left and the right, and then it will just be plain at the top and the bottom. So it looks like it's continuous and went off of the card. Now I wanted to add some borders on each side using the pink. So I'm going to cut some strips of that pink pattern paper. I will line up this scalloped border along the edge, hold this in place with some low tack tape, and run it through my die cut machine so that I have two little scallop borders. Then I'm going to assemble these by putting them on the back of this blue panel. So I'm using my grid mat to make sure everything is nice and centered. I put some adhesive on the bottom part of that pink piece of paper, and then I'll just lay my rectangle on top. And you can see how that is nice and centered and lines up with those scallops. And I'm just kind of checking to make sure it's nice and straight. Then I'll do the same thing with the other side, adding a little bit of adhesive through the center there where this rectangle is going to go. And then I'll just line it up. I kind of like to hover over it, make sure it's lined up, and then press it down. Now I can trim off the excess that goes past the rectangle, and luckily it ended up perfectly in between some scallops. Not that it really matters because I'm going to trim this off a little bit more. So with my paper trimmer, I'm trimming off 1/8 of an inch on each side because this is 4.5 and I need it to be 4 1/4. So I did that on both sides to where now the height of this panel is 4 1/4, which is the same as my background piece. Now I'm adding my adhesive all over the back of that yellow piece of pattern paper, and I can add this to a card base. But before I add the next piece, I wanted to add some tone-on-tone stamping to this yellow grid paper. So we're just adding some extra little images that go with our card. I'm using sunflower ink and those little ice creams in the treat cart set to add some tone-on-tone stamping to both sides of this. And you can see I brought my panel in to make sure that I was stamping far enough over to where it got hidden behind the panel. And I'm using all those little ice creams and then this little spoon, which is perfect to kind of fill in a little bit because it is skinnier than the ice creams. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to add a couple more stamps over here on the left side to fill it in. And then I added foam adhesive all over this panel. Now I got a little smudge there, but I flipped it around so it's at the bottom because I think it will be covered up by my images down there. I'm checking on my grid mat to make sure it's nice and centered and straight, and then I'll push that down. And then I can assemble some of my images. So I'm adding the little bunting to the treat cart. I am also going to go ahead and add that little ice cream sundae to the treat cart. I like assembling or pre-assembling, I should say, my images like this that I know are going to go together, so I can just take the piece as a whole and put it onto my card. I will also go ahead and put the little ice cream treats into the hands of my little critters that are going to be on the left and the right here. And then my little bear, he's going to go in my treat cart, and I'm just checking placement of things, making sure my rabbit's going to cover up my little bit of yellow smudge, and then I'm just adjusting that little ice cream sundae over so that we can see the little bear through the treat cart opening. Now for my sentiment, I'm using the smallest stitch sentiment banner, the sentiment from the set that says "You're the sweetest," and continuing on with using all my colors of ink, I thought I would stamp this in peacock. So there is my sentiment. I've added some foam squares on the back, and I will just layer this right along the bottom. I like to start with this at the bottom and then kind of build my little scene up from there. So I have my little rabbit here. He's going to cover up my mistake and sit right here on the left side. And I like that he's kind of hanging over the edge of that blue panel. I'll do the same with my little fox. And then for my little treat cart, I'm actually going to use some thin foam squares so that it sits back just slightly from the bunny and the fox, but it still has some dimension. So these are thin foam squares, they're not quite as thick. I'm going to go ahead and pull off all the liner paper and pick up my bear so that he ends up flat against the back. And then I can just pop this in there in the center and put it down. Now I felt like it needed some sparkle and some embellishments, so I have these iridescent sequins and I'm just sprinkling them around. And once I have my placement like, I will pick them up with my embellishment tool and add them with a little drop of glue. I think these are really fun because they kind of look like bubbles with that iridescent look. So it's really a fun summer treat party with those bubbles and ice cream. But I also always want some glitter, so I'm adding some glitter to the canopy of my treat cart. I also like to add it to the little ice creams because I think it looks like icy, like it's frozen. And then I added it to the little bunting banner in the center of the treat cart wheels. And then here is my finished card that uses those brand new coloring stencils from Lawnfawn. They are just so much fun, and I like having a different way to use my inks and a different way to color. So I hope this has inspired you to give them a try. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.